Hello, and welcome to The Confident Commit, the podcast for anyone who wants to join the conversation on how to deliver software better and faster.
If you're looking to build a trusted ship, tune in, let's confidently commit. Oh.
You're listening to Season 3, Episode 1. Brand new season. We're going to talk about teams, about great teams. I couldn't be more excited. I love the concept of teams. I love working in good teams. Like, there's so much to talk about and so much to say. And to kick off this season, also couldn't be more excited. I'm joined today by Wall Street Journal bestselling author and DevOps enthusiast, Gene Kim. Gene, thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, Rob, so delighted to be here. I've enjoyed so many of your previous episodes where so many people I admire have been on, and especially since I've been an enthusiastic user of CircleCI for at least 5+ years, myself, and even longer, being a part of Circle projects with my friend Jez Humble, who used it for many years before me.
Well, thank you. And you know, we were joking about this just before we started, but I feel like DevOps enthusiast is a little bit of like burying the lead on your contribution. You know, you mentioned folks that you know well that have been on the show, folks that haven't, like Jez. Hey, Jez, if you're listening, come join us. And like your contributions over the years have just been absolutely massive. You know, through your writing, through your work. And just really, really excited to talk about all of it, but then to take the team angle, because I think so much of, you know, of all of this is it's culture, it's how we work together, it's how we ultimately deliver as teams versus, you know, just individual efforts or tools or anything like that, right? So that's why we're talking about teams. You know, it's like, it's weird to intro with we're talking about software delivery, and then we go all over the place because everything matters. And teams, like, we work in teams. We were just talking before we started about Team of Teams, and I'm currently reading, and clearly you've read and had some references to there. So just, you know, how we think about being great and doing great things, so much of it is tied to how we work together. So let's just get started. Like, a little bit of an intro. You know, I have a feeling most people listening to this will know who you are, but if you don't, you know, I'd love to get a little bit of your background and particularly how you got inspired to get into writing and sort of, you know, your role in the overall kind of shifting of the movement. I don't even know exactly what to call it, but how did you find the inspiration to get into writing and to you know, teach us all how to be better at this?
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, so, you know, maybe just a little bit of background. I've been studying high-performing technology organizations since 1999, and that was a journey that went back when I was that started back when I was the CTO and technical founder of a company called Tripwire in the information security and compliance space. And so, you know, we want to study these amazing organizations that simultaneously had the best project due date performance and development. They had the best operational reliability and stability and ops, and they had the best posture, security, and compliance. So, and we want to understand, how did those amazing organizations make their good to great transformation, you know, so that, you know, we could explain to others how did, you know, they could replicate those amazing outcomes. And so that's a 23-year journey. And by far the biggest surprise was how it took me into the middle of the DevOps movement, which, you know, is impacting every industry these days. I mean, to find an era where one industry was being disrupted in the scale of which every one of our industries is being disrupted today. You have to go back to the 1980s when Toyota, you know, came into the U.S. marketplace, right, and started dominating, you know, the automotive sector at the expense of the U.S. auto manufacturers, which actually was viewed as an economic crisis, right, a national level. It required a national level response. Anyway, so yeah, I actually so that was. So I'm so grateful for my 13 years at Tripwire, where I got to work on this project. It's actually where I wrote my first book. It was called the Visible Ops Handbook, you know, how to create great operations and 4 steps using ITIL. And, you know, am I ashamed of that? No, it was, you know, ITIL was great because it was a way to describe operations in a way that, you know, we couldn't without it. And I guess kind of what led me, you know, made me so ready for the DevOps movement when I stumbled into it was just this observation in 2005 that there was this set of problems that would happen in every organization, you know, regardless of industry vertical, regardless of how old the organization is, regardless of size, profit, not for profit. And, you know, personally speaking, it felt like almost a moral crusade because it was just happening everywhere, and the consequences just seemed so horrendous. And so when I left Tripwire in 2010, that was right after we filed for our IPO. We just finished our S1 filing. We never went public, but for me, that was just a great time to sort of take some time off and just work on what became known as the Phoenix Project. And it really did feel like a moral crusade, just show that this is happening everywhere. And it wasn't just a technology problem. It was one of the most important business problems. So it's just, I love the software game, and my area of passion is studying not so much the tech giants these days, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, Microsoft, but instead how DevOps is being used in large, complex organizations that have been around for decades or even centuries.
Yeah, that, we spend a lot of time talking about every company becoming a software company, these trends, like people trying to understand how to be great at software. And so I can imagine there's some really interesting, explorations and understanding to be had in there.
Yeah, in fact, it's just kind of like one of the fun things, right? I've been running this conference called the DevOps Enterprise Summit, right? Since 2014. We had our first live event 2 weeks ago. The oldest organization who was presented at DevOps Enterprise, UK HMRC, Her Majesty's Revenue Collection Service. So they're a version of the IRS, founded in the year 1200. So, there's probably no code that goes that far back, but certainly values, traditions, right, that go back centuries.
Wow. I'm laughing internally at the term legacy that we love to use to talk about like code that was written last year, and I'm trying to imagine like at least the tax code, right? Not software code, but like the tax code probably has some weird legacy from that far back. That's like how taxes are collected and who collects them, and it is bizarre stuff that now is written in software.
Absolutely. And so just to geek out for a second, what I found so exciting about that story in 2016 is that, this group of courageous, technology leaders and business leaders are like, all right, how can we allow like the single parent to be able to complete their tax filing or the assessment like on the bus ride home, right? As opposed to like this horrible other way where, they might need, help or, need hours to do it. And it's just to do that in a very complex, what they said, a very complex IT estate is just, invigorating, energizing, inspirational, just to show like what technology can do for people.
Yeah, that's so cool. And, taking all that then and packaging it up and through all of your work, podcasts, blogs, books, all of it is, we're all benefiting. So speaking of books, we were talking about books before we even started. I love to read books. I've never written a book. You've obviously written some outside of your own books. What are one or two of your favorites on the subject that you think everyone should be paying attention to?
Yeah, one of them is certainly The Goal by Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt. So that's a novel about a plant manager who has to fix his cost and due date issues in 90 days. Otherwise, they shut the plant down. So I heard that about around 2000, and that just changed my life. And so obviously, the Phoenix Project is closely modeled after The Goal. Dr. Goldratt I had the pleasure of talking with him in 2004 with my fellow co-author Kevin Bear, and you can't help but be inspired and learn something from those interactions. So I hope I love that people call the Phoenix Project the goal of for our digital age. And then the other book is The High Velocity Edge by Dr. Steven Spear, and so he's a mentor of mine since 2014, and he's most famous for writing the most widely downloaded Harvard Business Review article of all time called Decoding the DNA of the Toyota Production System. That was in 1999. And, that was actually based on his doctoral dissertation at the Harvard Business School. And in support of that work, he actually worked on the plant floor of a tier 1 Toyota supplier for 6 months. And so, it kind of shows you kind of like how deeply he immerses himself in his work. And, I think we're actually working on a book that's coming out next year that's really trying to explain what is in common between Agile and DevOps and Lean and the Toyota Production System and safety culture and learning from incidents and team of teams. And I think our conclusion is that they're all incomplete expressions of a far greater whole, and that really we want to understand and be able to explain why organizations work the way they do, both in the ideal and not ideal.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So much to go into there, but I think that's a great transition into let's talk about the people. Then, right? It's all organizational in the end. Like we talk about tools, we talk about processes, all this stuff, but at the end of the day, it's about the people, right? And how we interact as teams. So, and I feel like I'd love your input on this. We've sort of lost the thread, like the origin on DevOps. It's like now we have people called DevOps. We have tools that like if you have this tool, you are DevOps sort of thing, versus kind of just thinking differently about how we work together. Like optimizing flow of information, breaking down barriers to collaboration, all these sorts of things. And so I imagine you're stuck in the middle of this confusion. How do you find yourself, trying to guide people through that? Do you find yourself trying to correct definitions, which honestly never works? Or how do you kind of, I guess, guide people to that notion of really the focus on the organization, the culture, the team?
Yeah, by the way, it's a great question, and to your point, I mean, kind of, I do the opposite of engage in those discussions. I mean, I love the definition of like DevOps is just the opposite of the old terrible way that we used to do things. I mean, not saying that all old ways are bad. It's like if they're old and terrible, well, that's a good thing to run away from, right?
Yeah.
And I think this has been something that I've been thinking about a lot with Dr. Spear. For the last 3 years. And I'll just say this, it is the most intellectually challenging thing I've ever worked on, and yet also the most rewarding and there was actually a point in the summer where I almost gave up. I was like, either I'm not smart enough, I don't understand development well enough, I don't understand anything well enough to do this book with him. But it did, I think we did have an aha moment where, I think it underscored there is something very important about how teams interact. And so your episode with Matthew Skelton was just fantastic. And I think, really what is a big problem to be solved? It's that we create organizations to bring the efforts of an ever-growing number of functional specialties to solve a common problem. However, most organizations find themselves completely unable to do anything that looks like harmonious integration of their work, right, towards a common goal. People are often miserable, can't get what they need, whether it's information, time, materials, equipment, working conditions, approvals. And even when they do get these things, they don't have the authority to do the right thing in the right way at the right time. And so, to me, it's a spectrum. To what extent can organizations fully unleash the full problem-solving and creative problem-solving efforts of people? Or to what extent are they constraining or even extinguishing entirely, the problem-solving capabilities of people? And I think that's really, the Phoenix Project, Unicorn Project, kind of explored what the second is. And if you can just entertain maybe just kind of the thought experiment that we came up with, that really brought a lot of clarity to me and why teams are so important. So we did we published two essays, and we're working on a third that show like how important teamwork is, right? So even moving a couch, two people moving a couch, let's call them Steve and Gene. Like, it's not all just brawn work. There's actually a tremendous amount of coordination that's required. So the instant you pick up the couch, right, you're communicating, where should we put our hands, who goes first to get through a doorway, around which axis do you orient, right? And if you put someone in the middle who prevents Steve and Gene from talking to each other directly, important signals like, my finger is stuck in the door jamb, or could you please go slower down the stairs, right, get lost, right? So it takes longer, the outcomes are not as good, and it's more dangerous. So like even moving a couch requires, communication and coordination and brain work. So the second essay was, all right, Steve and Gene are moving the couch to help their partners, Miriam and Marguerite, paint a room. And so now there's paint cans in the room, there's ladders, maybe even dependencies, right? And there's a lot more information that needs to be shared, right, for people to do what they need to do. But it kind of leads up to the third thought experiment, which is, all right, the room turns out so beautifully, they're asked to paint 100 rooms, right, in 10 apartments. And so Miriam and Marguerite appoint Steve as the chief moving officer and Gene as the chief paint officer. And so they get the list of the 100 rooms. Gene takes the schedule, right, and starts working with Steve on coming up with a schedule so that when the painters arrive, the furniture will be gone. And when the painting's done, the furniture is restored. And so when you put that into motion on day one, suddenly all these things are going wrong, right? Painters show up, furniture's still there. Why? Moving took longer than expected, or it was harder to move than thought, right? Or painters, movers show up and the painters aren't there, but still move the furniture anyway. Might lead to a situation where you run out of space to store the furniture, right? And now you got to move it outside in the rain, right? That's not so good. But what's so amazing is that like now small problems escape out of the room and now impact the system as a whole. Steve and Gene are just firefighting, trying to expedite issues. And like you have painters arguing with movers, but the only thing that they agree on is Steve and Gene are not very good at their job, right? So by the end of the day, none of the promises have been fulfilled. And just to wrap up, right? So imagine, right? They get together and reconfigure the teams. Now we create room teams that contain both the movers and painters. You appoint one coordination lead who's responsible for all internal sequencing of moving, painting, moving, right? And they're all now can work independently. When something goes wrong, right, problems stay in the room, right? And suddenly you can see all these wonderful modular characteristics even in sequential work. And Steve might even notice that some moving teams are using blankets to protect the furniture, right? And so he may create blanket teams to support the movers, right? And so this very parsimonious example can exhibit so many things we see in great organizations, like enabling teams, platform teams. And I'll just end with this one. And so they're really pushing the frontiers of performance. And I think the big aha moment for me was that the risks of things going wrong whenever you have sequential work is so high, but it can be done, right? And I think, just the second scenario shows why the technology community has worked so hard over the last 30 years to shift things left, right? Because the handoff from dev to QA to ops to deployment is so high, right, that we blow it. And I think so much of technical practices and architecture are explained by trying to solve this problem, including CI and CD. Does that resonate with you, Rob?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the part where people decide I'm really bad at my job, that part landed really well. But like the ability, like call it organizational agility, which is totally not a great way of wrapping up what you're saying. But like at scale, as you grow, maintaining that team-like ability, right? So, okay, give me things, like allow me to own the things that I'm supposed to be impacting in a way that I can adapt, that my team can adapt, right? With a small group, like, I mean, the chair or the moving the furniture piece, moving the sofa totally lands. Like just the intuitive communication, right? Like me just saying, when I hit my hand against the door, you react and you turn a little bit or slow down or whatever, right? And so every hop makes that more difficult.
Yeah,
makes
open
it
up
harder.
a ticket.
Right, exactly. If someone could hurry up and come here, like I need to expedite this ticket to get my finger out of the door jam or whatever, like that sounds horrible. Horrible. And so I think, first of all, I think that kind of illustration is great. And absolutely, like the desire is there, but we struggle to figure out how to make it work at
and just to riff with you, what I love about the third story is that everything in the system is identical. Same people, same. The only thing that's different is the management system and the architecture they're working within, right? And so we can isolate performance to something, when you subtract away everything, right? To explain uncommon results, you have to have an uncommon explanation, and to be able to say it is the management system that Steve and Gene used. I just for me, that is like a profound insight.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I can't remember the quote exactly, so I'm gonna make a mess of it, but at the end of Thinking in Systems, is it Danella Meadows? That talks about something along the lines of basically like you can't change the behavior of the system, but you could redesign it, right? And like basically the structure of the system defines how it's going to behave, and that's similar organizations are systems. And so to your point, saying I have all the same pieces, but if I organize them differently, the outcomes will be vastly different because I love the context or the concept of bounded rationality, right? Everybody operating in the system is doing what makes the most sense given the way it's structured and what they see and within their bounds. So you have to change the shape of that if you want different outcomes.
I love that. In fact, if there's one other dimension to the story that I could add, I love the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman and Tversky. I've read almost all of it, but I mean, they're profound insight, which won Kahneman a Nobel Prize. Was that human brains are amazing at solving complex problems. So call that mode 2 and slow thinking. But the majority of thinking is not that. It's kind of instincts and biases and so forth, because it takes less energy, it's faster and so forth. And so if you sort of observe how are people acting in that system, in the first scenario where everything was siloed, everyone at the edge were stuck in slow mode. They had to escalate to get things they needed. And Steve and Gene were in fast mode, reacting to the environment. Whereas in the second mode, right, we have unleashed the people at the edge to work fast, in flow, locked in, right, to focus on the work they want to be doing. And Steve and Gene are now able to be in this more slower, more deliberative system where they can think about reorganizing the system as opposed to reacting. And I love it that we have an incredible advantage over the environment. if it's slow, right, in
Yeah.
planning preparation. We are at a horrendous inherent disadvantage when the environment is operating faster than we can react to. And so I think that's another important thing about the way we structure organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. So that's a lot about, so that's kind of the organizational system view, and you're putting teams into that. And, in that, at the end of your story or parable, you have a bunch of different teams with kind of an understanding of what they're responsible for, and they can adapt to it. When you think about, like, let's dive into the team itself. If you were putting together a team today with everything that and you need to go be the crack room team, capable of getting everything done. How would you go about building that team? Like what sorts of things are you looking for? What are you paying attention to as you construct a group of people that are going to work effectively together?
This is a great question. In fact, this is what we were seeking to answer, very succinctly, parsimoniously. And, I think one of the key kind of telling indicators, right, is, what is the coordination cost in the system? When coordination costs are high, you spend all your energy and time coordinating with no time left over for the value creating activities, right, around collaboration. And so the opposite is, when everyone's liberated to do, creative, solving tough problems, but also kind of all these things that, people who've studied modularity would recognize. It's like they can act and experiment locally, independently. And so this is what creates agility in development, resilience in operations. And I think this, more than anything, is what allows us to make performance go exponential, right? What made, Amazon able to go from, tens of deployments a year, in 2004 to 136,000 deployments per day, by 2019. And, so it's kind of these modular properties, both in, in like the microservices context where you're partitioning, domains, but also in sequential work, right? In that second example, we were able to partition sequential work that has all these properties of modularity where local problems stay local. They don't impact the global system and vice versa. And so it's all about, how we create those interfaces between teams. So, I think that's kind of the design objective. So, we're calling it, we're calling it the 4 S's. They have to be simple, not complex, right? The interfaces are, they have to be standard, meaning the interfaces are simple. Everyone kind of knows their place in the system. And, very much like in the Amazon $1 billion re-architecture, right? All communications go through those service interfaces, those APIs, and that's what allows us to, have those modular characteristics. It has to be self-stabilizing. So when something goes wrong in one room, painters take longer than if moving takes longer than expected. We don't disturb the room work of other rooms, right? Painters wait patiently, or maybe even painters help, right? And then this leads to the fourth characteristic of synchronization, is that the majority of the cognitive activity is happening at the edge, not the center. So it's a pull system. It's not a centralized system that's telling each node what to do. And I think those are kind of the, I would say the clinical characteristics of great systems. We're talking about DevOps, manufacturing, pharmaceutical development, team of teams.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm so glad that I caught you in the middle of all of this deep thinking. Like, and it was a sidebar, but I just want to call out for anyone listening, like the point where you said, I was feeling like I wasn't smart enough to work on this. Like, that's so valuable for everyone who's listening to this, to be like, but wait a second, Gene knows everything about this. Like, and like, we all have those moments, right? We're just like, wow, this is a really hard problem. And then you're at this crossroads. It's sort of like, or maybe it's a hard problem, and also like the self-doubt and like, maybe I'm not the right person or whatever. And these crossroads where it's really exciting to then say, you know what? This is a hard problem. I'm going to go figure it out. Like, I'm in an environment that supports me, right? Like, as we talk about teams and working with great teams, which we're going to get into in just one second. But like that, I just want to reflect on that. And thank you for saying that out loud, because I think a lot of people will hear that and be able to, give themselves a little boost of like, yeah, sometimes the road ahead looks hard, but if we dig in and drive through it, like, we're all going to get better for it. So that's awesome.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course.
Yeah. So just maybe to tell you the story of like what caused me, why would I say this thing like that? Is that, for 2.5 months, made no progress on the manuscript. I was rewriting the same section over and over again. And I decided to go on a walk, no headphones, took one of the dogs and just started walking. And I would not come back until I either had clarity or maybe I wouldn't come back at all, right? But and it was just this kind of very humbling feeling, right? To say, all right, I don't understand software development enough because the example just it's not. I'm confusing myself, right? Try to make an example of like front of house, back of house in a restaurant, but turns out I don't understand restaurants well enough. How about a movie theater? Well, I guess I don't understand movie theater operations well enough, and so just to kind of revisit the couch paint example was so clarifying, and just because it forced, when you use a simple example, it forces you to have the clarity of thought, and so I love that phrase. Anyone can make something simple appear complex, but it's a lot harder to take something complex and make it simple. And so it was just I can't describe the feeling of like when Steve and I said, all right, this is it, right? Because we instantly knew what each other were talking about. And I think it conveys those important parts that I think are so relevant to talk about why teams work in one configuration and why they work profoundly awful in another configuration.
Yeah. I love it. And there's so many lessons, Gene. Like there's a great lesson in there too, which is even like the analogical thinking, right? Like, okay, I'm struggling in this concept, but what if I think about something that's again simpler or just a different, like some people have solved this in a different context. Can I apply that context and give myself a different frame of reference? So there's so much power in all of that. I could spend another 5 hours talking about analogies. So yeah, go ahead.
So what I find so fascinating about this is that if we can screw up moving and painting, arguably not the most complex work, it's operates at a slow tempo. The consequences aren't very high if things go wrong. So you take software development or like high tempo manufacturing or like safety critical applications where, across all dimensions, faster frequency, higher consequence, greater variety, right? Across every dimension. Like how hard is it, and just how miraculously is it that this community has figured out these patterns, right? To obviate some of these risks. It's just something I'm just finding so satisfying to study.
That's amazing. All right, well, before I get fired by my own producer, we should probably head into wrapping this up. But let's move into the team spotlight. This is the closing question for the team series. I guess this is our first episode, so I'll have to explain that a little bit. But we're going to ask this consistently of all the guests to collect some stories. I'm really excited about it. So can you tell me about the best team that you've ever worked on, or a great team if you don't want to be too judgmental, and the specific moment where you realized like this is a great team and this is what makes this team great?
Yeah, for me, the fact that this coincides with one of the projects that I have just the most amount of professional pride being associated with, and this was the State of DevOps research project that I worked on with Dr. Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble. And so we worked together from 2013 to 2019. And so Jez and I actually worked on it together for 1 year, and then that was amazing. But amazing as that was, when when Dr. Nicole Forsgren joined the team, I mean, just took us up to an entirely new level. And it's just, I cannot, so that's a cross-population study that spanned 36,000 respondents over 6 years. And I think what made that experience so fun was that we all came from different backgrounds. So Jez spent most of his career in development. I got my master's degree in computer science, but I spent most of my career really identifying towards operations because I thought that's where all the saves were made. And Dr. Nicole Forsgren, right? She had a background in system administration, programming, but she also has this incredible wealth of experience and expertise around survey design and analysis. And so it was just there's a specific memory I have. I think it was in the 2015 State of DevOps research. And when the clusters came out, not only did it replicate what we had done in the year before, but I just remember, I remember this, I have this memory of posting like it was like the picture of NASA mission control when the Mars Curiosity landed, where everyone's like cheering, right? And it was just that sense of elation. And, I think we all felt that we were on the frontier of something important that defied easy explanation. And, every year that came out, I mean, I felt like we were explaining just some very important observable phenomenon with ever shrinking number of principles that confirmed deeply held intuitions that revealed surprising insights. And so it's like, I felt like we were really advancing science and the way we work. So it was one of the best teams I've certainly ever had the privilege of working with.
Love it. I mean, my takeaways, like very different perspectives coming in, right? And then feeling like you're working on something that really matters. And that, the elation is not just elation, right? It's that like together we've achieved something that is really exciting. And that like working on that together, having that joint sense of purpose, I think is so critical and can make a lot of teams great, right? What very few people end up talking about is, well, this particular person was on the team or that particular person. It's that like together we did something. And that's why I think we're humans, we're social creatures, and like having a joint sense of purpose is just so awesome. Well, and for the rest of us, we're all excited that you did that work, right? And I guess for anyone who doesn't know, and I'm making this face of like, I don't know who you'd be, but like those were individual reports, but that also ended up was the background to Accelerate. If anyone hasn't read that, highly recommend it. Clearly I spent a little bit of time thinking about software delivery, and there's a lot that you can learn from reading that. Well, Gene, thank you so much for joining. This has been absolutely awesome. Thanks for everything that you do and everything that we're able to learn from it. Absolute pleasure having you here on the show today.
Right back at you. Keep up the amazing work. And hey, I'm looking forward to many great things coming out of you and team for years to come.
We're doing everything we can. And thanks to everyone else for tuning in today. If you enjoyed the podcast, share it with all your friends, subscribe on your podcast provider of choice. And if there's someone you want us to talk to or something you want us to talk about, find us on Twitter at CircleCI. Thanks again, Gene. This is great.
Thank you.